In the early 1800s, you could buy a pound of lobster in Boston for 11 cents. A pound of baked beans cost 53 cents. Lobster was cheaper than beans. It was cheaper than bread. It was fed to cats. People used it as fertilizer. And if your neighbors saw lobster shells near your house, they assumed you were broke. Because in colonial America, lobster wasn't a delicacy. It was a sign of poverty and degradation. Today, a single lobster roll in Manhattan costs $45. A lobster dinner at a high-end restaurant can run over $100. The global lobster industry generates billions of dollars a year. And the same animal that colonists were embarrassed to serve guests is now the centerpiece of anniversary dinners, luxury hotel menus, and Instagram posts designed to make your friends jealous. No food in history has undergone a more dramatic reversal in status. And the reason it happened involves a canning industry that nearly wiped them out, a railroad trick that exploited ignorance, a Gilded Age eating contest, and climate change that's threatening to end the story altogether. When European settlers arrived on the New England coast in the 1600s, lobsters were everywhere. And everywhere is not an exaggeration. After storms, they washed ashore in piles reportedly 2 feet high. Colonists could wade into shallow water and pick them up by hand. There was no skill required, no boat, no equipment. They were as available as rocks, and just as exciting. The colonists called them the cockroach of the sea. They looked like oversized insects. They scavenged the ocean floor. And these weren't the modest 1-pound lobsters you see in restaurant tanks today. Colonial lobsters were enormous, regularly exceeding 20 pounds. Imagine something the size of a small dog crawling across a dinner plate. Not exactly appetizing. Because they were so abundant and so cheap, lobsters became food for people who couldn't choose what they ate. Prisoners, indentured servants, enslaved people, children. The stories have grown over the centuries. You've probably heard that servants had clauses in their contracts limiting lobster to 3 meals a week, or that prisons were forbidden from serving it more than twice. Historians have found little hard evidence for those specific claims, but the broader picture is clear and well documented. Lobster was low-status food. Plymouth Colony Governor William Bradford wrote with visible embarrassment in the 1620s that all they could offer newcomers was lobster or a piece of fish. This was not pride. This was an apology. For roughly 200 years, nothing changed. Lobster sat at the bottom of the culinary hierarchy, and nobody saw any reason to move it. Then came the canning industry, and everything shifted. The first lobster cannery in Maine opened in 1842. Canning technology had been developing for decades, but lobster presented a unique challenge. It developed heat-resistant bacterial spores that made early canned batches dangerous. Once processors figured out that extending the cooking time killed the spores, production took off, and that breakthrough didn't just make canned lobster safe, it inadvertently improved canning standards for all preserved foods. Lobster, the trash food, accidentally made the entire canning industry safer. At first, the canneries targeted the massive lobsters that were plentiful along the Maine coast. 4 or 5 pound animals were considered small. But the canneries were so efficient at processing that they burned through the supply at alarming speed. Within a few decades, they were canning half-pound lobsters, juveniles that hadn't even reached breeding age. The first wave of overfishing had begun, and it would permanently shrink the average size of the American lobster. But it was what happened next that truly transformed lobster's reputation. And it wasn't a chef, a restaurant, or a cultural shift. It was a train. As railroads expanded across America in the mid-1800s, transportation managers needed to feed passengers on long-distance routes. They needed food that was cheap to procure and easy to serve in bulk. Lobster fit perfectly. It cost almost nothing on the coast, and it could be transported in specialized boats with circulating seawater. Here's the key detail. The passengers were from inland cities, Kansas, Missouri, Ohio. They had never seen a lobster in their lives. They had no idea it was considered trash food in New England. When they tasted it for the first time, they didn't bring any coastal prejudice to the table. They just thought it was delicious. The railroads had accidentally conducted one of history's great marketing experiments. Take a despised product, remove it from the context where it's despised, present it to people who have no preconceptions, let them judge it on taste alone. The result was immediate. Inland passengers loved it, demand climbed, and lobster started appearing on restaurant menus in cities hundreds of miles from the nearest coast. By the time coastal New Englanders realized that the rest of the country was paying good money for their poverty food, the reputation shift was already underway, and the Gilded Age was about to accelerate it beyond recognition. In the 1890s, enormous dining establishments began opening in New York City's theater district around Times Square. They were called lobster palaces, palatial restaurants with marble interiors, chandeliers, and velvet drapes, designed to attract Broadway celebrities, wealthy industrialists, and anyone who wanted to be seen spending money in public. The first was Rector's, which opened on Broadway between 43rd and 44th Street in 1899. On opening night, 2,500 guests filled the main dining room and balcony. Others followed: Churchill's, Shanley's, Buster Noby's. The most famous patron was Diamond Jim Brady, a man so legendary for his appetite that Rector's owner reportedly called him the best 25 customers I ever had. Brady didn't just eat lobster, he ate lobster at a scale that turned meals into spectacle, which was exactly the point. At the same time, Delmonico's, one of America's first fine dining restaurants, had invented lobster Newburg in the 1880s. Lobster meat simmered in butter, cream, sherry, and egg yolks. It became the signature dish of Gilded Age excess. The name was actually changed from Wenberg to Newburg after the sea captain who inspired the dish got into a fight at the restaurant and was banned. They kept the recipe. They just scrambled his name. In less than 50 years, lobster had gone from fertilizer to the defining dish of New York's most exclusive dining scene. The transformation happened so fast that there was likely a moment in the 1890s when a New England servant was eating lobster out of obligation, while a Gilded Age millionaire was eating the exact same animal as a symbol of wealth. Same creature, opposite meanings, separated by nothing but geography and perception. Then the reversal nearly reversed itself. The Great Depression cratered the luxury food market. Nobody was paying premium prices for lobster when they couldn't afford bread. Prices plummeted. During World War II, lobster wasn't rationed, unlike beef and pork, which temporarily made it affordable again. Some historians argue that wartime accessibility actually broadened lobster's fan base, because middle-class families who'd never been able to afford it suddenly could. After the war, prices climbed back up, and this time they kept climbing. As the American middle class expanded through the 1950s and 60s, lobster became the aspirational meal, the thing you ordered to celebrate a promotion, an anniversary, a special occasion. It appeared on hotel menus, cruise ship buffets, and steakhouse specials as the ultimate treat-yourself protein. Restaurants priced it accordingly. The perception of luxury, once established, created its own economic gravity. People expected lobster to be expensive, so restaurants charged more, which reinforced the perception, which justified even higher prices. By the 1970s, the reversal was total and permanent. Nobody alive remembered lobster as poverty food. Today, the economics have a new driver, and it's not perception. It's scarcity. Climate change is warming the waters off New England faster than almost anywhere else in the world's oceans. Lobsters are cold water animals. As temperatures rise, they migrate north and deeper, moving into colder Canadian waters and away from the traditional fishing grounds of Maine and Massachusetts. Maine's lobster catch dropped from £132 million in 2016 to under £94 million by 2023. The supply is shrinking, while global demand, driven by markets in China, Japan, and Europe, keeps growing. The irony is almost too perfect. Lobster started as the most abundant, most despised creature on the American coast. It became expensive because a railroad accidentally marketed it to people who didn't know any better. It became luxury because Gilded Age millionaires used it as a status prop. And now it's becoming genuinely scarce because the ocean that once piled it on beaches in 2-foot heaps is warming too fast for the animal to survive in its historical range. Somewhere in the 1620s, William Bradford apologized for serving lobster to his guests. 400 years later, the same meal would cost those guests $50 a plate and require a reservation made weeks in advance. Nothing about the lobster changed. It's the same animal, the same taste, the same meat pulled from the same shell. What changed was everything around it. Who was eating it, where they were eating it, what they already believed about it, and how much of it was left. Lobster's story isn't really about food. It's about how human perception manufactures value out of thin air, and how fragile that value becomes when the thing itself starts disappearing. If this one surprised you, subscribe